El panel es sobre Cuba's emerging private economy. We have Carlos Fernández-Aballí. He studied at the University of Bristol in England and at Ohio and la Universidad de La Habana. We have Mario González-Corzo del Lehman College Unit at City University of New York. We have Roberto González-Peralo de la Universidad de Matanzas, and Roberto is also a blogger. He has a blog in Cuba called La Joven Cuba in Matanzas, Cuba. We have as discussant Archie Reader and Christopher Baker. So we will start with Carlos Fernández-Aballí and sobre las Industrias Purita is a case study. And ¿en qué lugar en Cuba está en La Habana?
Right, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me here for this conference. What I bring you is a very simple presentation. It's just a case study of a practical experience of setting up a cooperative in Havana. One of the new cooperative forms, the non-agricultural cooperatives. And the name of our cooperative is Cooperativa, Industrias, Purita. And we made seasoning, spices. Okay, so what I want to do is quickly lay out Cuba's entrepreneurial environment, some of the key understandings of how you define a business idea in Cuba that could work, and then why food dehydration is important, and a bit of the successes and setbacks of our project. Right, so I want to start with an idea that I put forth every time I talk about enterprising in Cuba, which is that this little dot here is Cuba. Okay? Cuba is the only country in the planet with a high human development index and an ecological footprint below the planet's regeneration capacity. And that is a very meaningful thing. I think that is a product of necessity, not design, but nevertheless, perhaps it provides a clean slate of where to head forward, or how to head forward in terms of finding a way to improve our consumption capacity, without exceeding the planet's regeneration capacity. Okay? Right, so back to Cuba's entrepreneurial environment. We're a poor country, and in contrast, we have a service economy, right? Where 70%, so it's 39% comes from the export of professional services, and 31% comes from tourism in the island, right? And it's an open economy, therefore, these two are our biggest sources of foreign currency, right? At the same time, our consumers, we have consumer goods trade imbalance of a size of about 5,000 million US dollars. Okay, so when we have President Raul Castro saying we need to substitute imports, talking about import substitution, he's actually talking about that 5,000 million US dollars. Okay, which is what, if we can do that, we can start closing our economy and depending a bit more on our small internal markets. Okay, of that, 41% is energy and 17% is food. Now, here's a technical thing. To produce food, you can also produce energy if you take a renewable energy technological paradigm. Yeah, sugarcane is a key example behind it, right? Just to put it into perspective, with about 4% of our arable land, we could produce the same amount of energy out of the sugar industry if we could match Brazilian efficiencies, right? That we consume throughout the year, right? So we can supply Cuba's energy demand with the sugar industry if we could match Brazilian efficiencies with 4 to 10% of our arable land. So we have the solution. Now, this is the biggest problem. It's called a logistics performance index was 2.07. That's medium low. Anything is a bit less than that, right? So, and there's a huge challenge for anybody that tries to do anything more complex than a restaurant. You can't move things around. You can't easily access resources or connect with the region. Everything takes longer than it should. We know the internet is not facilitated, so the performance index really hinders what entrepreneurs can do. On the other hand, we also have the double currency system, and the double currency system provides a huge challenge for entrepreneurs because not only the state-run companies have the political advantage, but they also have a 1 to 25 advantage towards your buying power. Okay? And that is a huge challenge. You have to be 25 times better than your already powerful competitor. Right? At the same time, you have this very rare situation where you have 5 different markets with different purchases, where money has different purchasing power parity within the same economic scenario. So you have the TRDs, which are the stores where you buy CUCs, cooks. You have the rations, las bodegas, which today still supply about 41% of the Cubans' diet, the nutritional necessities. You have the informal market, okay, which is also where most of the consumer goods that Cubans use get sold, or a lot of the consumer goods get sold through the informal market. Then you have the pesos market, so the formal market in pesos. And then you have the non-state sector, which works in both currencies but has a completely different pricing policy. Right? So as an entrepreneur, to develop a competitive price becomes really difficult. Okay? Because it's really difficult to establish your costs. Now, the legal framework for the non-state sector, and a bit about foreign investment. Our legal framework today, I wouldn't say it's good, but I'm going to say it's sufficient. Okay? You can start up a business, you can, according to the law, okay? You can start up a business, you can develop business relationships with suppliers and with clients, and you can even access to foreign investments. Right? And technically, cuentapropistas, even though they don't have a legal form, according to the contract law, their license should grant them the possibility of all those spaces, including all the banking services and the fact and accessing even a foreign partner in association with a government company. Right? Because you have to have a contract, you have to have a joint administration contract, okay, with established company, and that company could then have received a foreign investment. This company could be a Cooperativa and Agropecuarios, it could be a CNA, okay, it could be one of the non-agricultural corporates. Right now, that's technically what you can do, but practically what you can do is a lot less, because you have all the cultural barriers about using the law. Nobody wants to take the first decision. Nobody wants to be the first person that says, yeah, let's do it, and sign the papers. Okay? And there is a reticence to change in that sense. At the same time, what sources of funding entrepreneurs have? Well, the government has set up a fiduciary fund in Cuban pesos to back up bank loans, and there's very soft bank loans available for entrepreneurs, for cuentapropistas. They go in the order of $4,000 US, so 80,000 pesos. For CNA, Cooperativas and Agropecuarios, I know people that are asking for 30 million pesos, so that's over a million CUCs. And people, at the same time, so you're looking at tax rates in the order of 4%, compounded annually. Now, the expectation of your turnaround is 1 year, right? So you're expected to turn around your business in 1 year and pay off your debt. And that's very difficult if you're setting up an investment from the start. It's almost impossible. So what is happening, and it happened to us as well, and you'll see later, is that you have to go and renegotiate your loan. But there is all the goodwill to help in doing that. Okay? Now, there's another source of funding, which is called the Municipal Local Development Initiatives. And that's it's type of a lost fund system, but you're expected to pay it back if your business is successful. Okay? And it's locked for entrepreneurial initiatives within state companies or within the corporate sector. Yes, and the city of Havana, for example, has $20 million earmarked for that fund. Right, so there are some funding opportunities for newly emerging companies that don't have somebody, for example, here, who is going to back them up with their initial capital for their business. Right, so taking all that into account, what's a good business idea in Cuba? Well, first of all, how do you set up a business? Well, you can set up a business from 4 different modes. One is a cuenta propista, and that has 4 bureaucratic steps. The other 2 modes is you can establish a cooperative from an existing government company. So now we're talking about shifting 12,000 restaurants and catering businesses into the private sector. And you can start a cooperative from the private sector, and that's the case of Industrias Purita. We went from being a cuenta propista, convinced the municipality, and set up our cooperative project. Or you can do with a foreign company. So today you can do 100% foreign company in Cuba, and that's permitted in the investment law. Okay, this process here is complicated. You have to do business with Cuba for 3 years before you can get established. In the Mariel Special Development Zone, it's a bit quicker, but nevertheless, it's another way to start a business in Cuba. It doesn't have to be 100%. You can do, if you want to move things quicker, you can find a Cuban partner, and you can do an economic association, or you can do a mixed company. And all of those are possibilities. Right? Now, if I was going to recommend a business startup in Cuba, I would say go simple. Simpler the better. Anything that is complex, the logistics index will kill you, and you will not get very far. Okay? At the same time, the supply chains, you have to, the reason for having simple ideas is that your supply chains are very complex to establish, both culturally and because of shortages in consumer goods. Okay? You must pick up a business idea that has established commercialization space. Okay? You cannot rely on that somebody else is going to market your product appropriately. You want to make sure that you can market your product all the way. And your only chance at advertisement is doing guerrilla marketing afterwards, so you have to find ways to piggyback on top of other spaces that can be visualized. Okay? And today, the businesses that are being successful are those that are in the service industry, that go from construction service or entertainment, catering, hospitality, and construction. And then, in terms of consumer goods, selling consumer goods in Cuba is quite prosperous, but most of the trade in consumer goods is happening in the informal market. So there aren't many manufacturers being successful at the moment. There's some, but they're not the most prosperous of the enterprises, right? This is more or less the competition and how it looks like. You're looking at 8,000 agricultural cooperatives, 352 CNAs, 4,000 being discussed at the moment from all over the country, 477, sorry, missed 1,000 there, 470,000 TCPs. And yeah, there's a lot of ice cream sellers there, but there's a lot of very serious businesses there that are making turnarounds in the millions of CUCs. Okay? And there's about 6,000 state enterprises. So wait a minute. In the next few years, we're going to have at least another 10,000 CNAs, 8,000 agricultural cooperatives, all the TCPs. Well, Cuban economy is a private economy. I just want to bring that into perspective. Okay? There's a very large number of enterprises today working in the private sector, and very shortly, very, very shortly, there already are more than the state sector, but actually the number of legal forms in the state sector are going to be 30% of our economic weight, even though they're going to have earmarked the access to the resources. But if you look at it, well, what is the biggest natural resource in Cuba? It's the land. Well, 70% of land is already in the non-state sector. Right? So, what initiatives, if you're going to not do a service but produce consumer goods, what initiatives find support? The ones that address import substitutions. Okay, so you have to be able to deliver a product which today the country imports, and that you can manufacture it in Cuba at the same quality or better quality than your imports. And then you find support, and your business goes through the 11 levels of approval that you need to set up a cooperative from the non-state sector. Right? So that said, what happened with Purita? Well, after we had to close down the first transnational cooperative that was founded in Cuba, which was called SOLS, Development Technology Solutions. We founded it in Barcelona to sell social housing projects using technology that was given the Habitat prize in 2008. And it was a product from Puhai. We couldn't beat the logistics index. It was too complex of an idea. And we sat down and we created Sazon Purita. This is our mechanical designer, right? And we said, we designed and built our dehydration technology, and we designed it so that you could use the sun. This is the second level of investment. Today we're still using liquefied gas, so GLP, but everything that we have produced can actually use the sun to do the dehydration process. And the idea to market was initially dehydrated garlic. Then that had to change. Garlic is a big business in Cuba. So I don't know if you heard Triana talking about the fortunes in the south of Havana with fortunes well in the millions of dollars. Most of them are garlic producers. All right? You got farmers there managing 100 hectares of garlic. Yeah, and with a crop that fluctuates in price about 600% within the year. At the moment, it's fluctuating way more than that, and with profit margins in the order of 4,000 times. So 4,000% the production cost. Okay, so serious speculation around garlic and around food production. Right? So, anyhow, we bumped that with that little hiccup along the way, which means it was very difficult to buy garlic because everybody wants to keep it in storage for selling it at the end of the year when there is no garlic. Right, in 2013, nevertheless, we convinced the government of 10 de Octubre to bring us up and launch a non-agricultural cooperative, and that allowed us to make our little plant. And basically, this was our vision. Remember that little red dot at the corner of basically, what we got in Cuba is land, sun, and water. 1 million professionals. Can we make a sustainable product consumer industry that can have products that can be, because they're ecological, because they're sustainable, because they have low externality cost, can compete, for example, in the consumer market here in the United States? Is that possible? We believe it's possible, and we believe we have people in Cuba that can deliver solutions like that. And Industrias Purita is a Cuban engineering, so it's a Cuban engineering technology that has been manufactured in Cuba, which takes organic food production, does a sustainable conservation process, and we still haven't managed to do sustainable packaging with it, but we want to do that. And basically, it's in a very small example, in a very local way, an idea that is like what I think we should be having. So anyhow, that's a bit what is Purita. The size of our market is the $10 million of imports of spices, which is actually undersupplied. The spices market in Cuba and the spices consumption in Cuba is undersupplied, so that's the business is greater than that. And the idea is to generate autochthonous technological development and local development in different business models. So it's try to be competitive within a corporate business model, right? So be responsible with what we do and take care of our environmental costs, right? So what has worked? We started with garlic. Garlic became impossible. Then we started sourcing other things. Everything in big quantities in Cuba becomes very difficult. So all you can do is you got to diversify your products, right? So therefore, we developed 14 different products in 2014 of different spices. So we could use the small plantations of farmers in San Miguel del Padrón as our source of raw materials. It's working fine now. It took us about a year to set up, convince the people that they should do it. It was quite a lot of work and a lot of trouble to get people on board. Our current production capacity is 18 tons of dehydrated peanuts a year and 1.4 tons of dry spices, so it's a very small enterprise. But the machine we have finishing right now can deal with about 20 tons of spices or dry fruits a year, tropical dry fruits, and up to 100 tons of garlic, right? Well, what is 100 tons of dry garlic? Hey, that's half of the import of garlic for the whole meat industry of Cuba, right? So what is a very small setup is actually a very meaningful number in terms of the country, right? So I got 2 minutes, but I'm finishing now. That's good. Right, so we put forth an attractive business idea, which meant we got support from the bank. We had 985,000 Cuban pesos from the bank to do our production facility. We did our technology. We have a small farm that is joined, it's about 6 hectares. 1 hectare is set up completely with irrigation system and everything. And having our own farm allowed us to convince the farmers. Being engineers and going through the trouble of developing our technology is actually what capitalized, which added the most capital into our business. Okay, the fact that we could think for our business and we didn't have to import our technology actually added a lot of value into what we were doing. Okay, and because the bank gave us the money to be able to do it, and there was the flexibility to be able to make it happen, yeah, we had a plant that if we were selling in the international markets and we had access to better materials to build it because it's very artisan, it's worth $80,000 US. So it's twice the price of the loan we got, right? We are advertising in the fairs, in the agriculture fairs in Havana, and now we have just gained at the news before I got on the plane, access to the retail stores in Havana. So before, that has been a very difficult negotiation, but now we're going to be in the pesos retail stores in Havana, in 5 different places. So Central Havana, Monaco, that's Víbora, that's the 10th of October, Náutico, in Playa, Nuevo Vedado, and in our municipality in San Miguel del Padrón. Okay? And what has worked really well for us is to make friends. Okay? We have had to put our heads down and take a lot of beatings all along this process, but we sort of put our head down and smiled, and did it again, and did it again, and did it again, and we made friends along the way. The end is we have friends, and people that are assisting us through the process. Wherever, and we can knock on doors, and people pull strings to help us beat the culture, okay, of not making that first decision, right? So, that said, the work culture has been a setback all along. We designed a speak to the market forced by the bank. We had to sell and do our production facility altogether. Within 1 year, we completely overestimated our capacity, and we have had to renegotiate our loan. Now we're looking at a long-term loan with 44 months and only 12,000 Cuban pesos a month. So it's something we can deal with. 1 to 25 exchange rate. It has been very difficult to fight against that. Estimate costs that we didn't do a good cost estimation. So you have to have very large profit margins, which are very difficult to put on things like spices. Okay, with very simple, low value added goods. Okay, and the disconnected economy, both nationally and internationally, is still a huge limitation. But this year we got included into the plan of the economy. So for 2016, we're going to have packaging, professional packaging, which is great. And the bottom line is, all of this process slowed us down to such a point where by this time we have a huge cash deficit problem. Where if we couldn't renegotiate our loan, we'd have to be closing the book. Okay? So, in conclusion, there's a working legal framework. There's a growing and flourishing non-state sector. So, not everybody has Purita's story. There's other people that are doing very successful business in Havana at the moment. And most barriers are cultural. Cultural barriers are slow to put away. More economic synergies nationally and internationally are required for any business to be successful in Cuba. We need greater guarantees for investors. The laws are really very, they just don't address the problem of how you bring investment and safeguard investment into the new sector. And we need higher level initiatives, so we need to look at the professional sector and help to empower the professional sector. And I think for Cuba, sustainable is the way forward, especially in enterprises around the energy and food sectors. And thank you very much for your attention.
Our next presenter is Mario González-Corzo.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to participate in the panel, and also for liberating me from the registration table, where I spent all day today. I want to say that after listening to your presentation, listening to your paper, it's almost like we coordinated together, because it's like an academic exercise where you are presenting a case study, and I'm going to attempt to some degree to present some part of what we think is a theoretical framework. So my presentation is really based on the analysis of the literature on what happens to entrepreneurship when economies transition, but when they transition not to a free market economy, but when they transition to some form of socialism that we consider or define, or has been defined as reform socialism. And so I'll talk about the framework for entrepreneurship in that environment. We'll talk about some of the principal characteristics. You alluded to a lot of them, so it's like a follow-up presentation. I'll talk about the principal types of entrepreneurs and strategies. What are some of the things that can be learned by looking at, for those of us that study Cuba, and then what are some pending questions, which, by the way, implicitly in your presentation you alluded as well. And so when we look at socialism or the transition from classical to reform socialism, I think it's pretty obvious, as you also mentioned, that when bureaucratic regulations are eliminated, as they were present under the classical system, the elimination of those constraints is one of the reasons why you mentioned Cuba growing the private sector. You call it the private sector, the non-state sector in Cuba, and so that's one of the reasons why it grows, right? Because of those constraints are being eliminated, and so we'll notice that in many of these economies, right, a significant portion of the labor force voluntarily will enter the non-state sector, either as Autopistas or Cooperativa, Agropecuarios, or some other forms of cooperatives, and so on. What we also find is the emerging non-state sector, a larger portion of the population, of the economically active population, joining that sector because they have it's culturally accepted. It's become more culturally accepted. It's not just about the economics of it, for more income and earnings and so on, but also because it's okay to be an entrepreneur. It no longer carries a taboo. And so the other thing, of course, that most of us that study this aspect of the process, of the post-socialist process, understand is that entrepreneurs represent a significant source of private revenue. And of course, when it grows, when places like yours expand, it creates more output, more employment, and in some ways, not always, more economic efficiency. But there are case studies where actually the economic efficiency goes down for a while, and then it goes back up again, or as the economic framework is more relaxed. When also in the case of Cuba, we find that it's not just micro enterprises, but there's also still a significant portion of the labor force that's engaged in moonlighting, is what they call it in the literature, right? So people who work in the state sector, I have relatives who do it in Cuba, and they take the tools and whatever it is, whether it's a car or some tools or something, and they moonlight in the private sector. Of course, everybody here knows about agricultural production, but the big one really is household-based microenterprises, where it's not moonlighting, but we have individuals who are basically operating all kinds of microenterprises out of their household. One key point that, again, it's been found in many of the sources of the literature, I'm only citing a few here in this presentation, is that even though the share of the economy in the private sector will increase quite dramatically in terms of employment, in terms of output, and so on, the private sector remains under the shadow of the state. And what that means, of course, is that they also private sector operators, not only cuentapropistas, I also mentioned the people who do moonlighting, they understand quite well what it means to operate under the shadow of the state. So the relationship between the private sector, the emerging non-state sector, and the government state sector, it's full of contradictions, it's full of the ambiguities and so forth and so on. Okay. When you look at entrepreneurs, and again, I was attentively listening to what you were saying, and I traveled to Cuba, and I talked to some of the entrepreneurs and all that. They're all characterized by many things. And one of the characteristics, of course, is that they want to be economically independent. These are people that are very empresariales, entrepreneurial in nature. They're also risk averse, meaning they're willing to undertake risk for additional expected return, right? So they're very risk averse. They persevere. You mentioned in your presentation that you tried, you bow your head, and you persevere, and then you succeed, right? And then, of course, they have a high degree of self-confidence. Also able to learn quickly, innovate, be creative, and really create their new order. This is something that's current in Cuba now, which is that there's sort of like an implicit order how entrepreneurs interact with each other. Okay, so that's very common in other experiences. They're innovators, risk takers, profit-oriented, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The principal contributions are, of course, job creation, the utilization of human capital, although, yes, as you, also one point that I took away from your presentation is that there's a problem in finding qualified labor and people that have the culture of working in that environment to some degree, okay? So, but in general, what these emerging private sector will do is provide an alternative source of employment for people that are risk takers, self-confident, perseverance, and so forth and so on. And so the rationale for this, of course, is economic growth and being able to create new services, new products that will meet the demand, the growing demand of the population. Because one thing that we have to bear in mind is that these entrepreneurs, these micro-enterprises, are not selling to some abstraction. They're selling to other parts of the population, of which an increasing number participate in the non-state sector. So they're becoming more wealthy, and therefore there's a growing demand for goods and services. So this is pretty consistent up until now, The experience of Cuba seems to be pretty consistent with the other countries. I also talk about the different kinds of entrepreneurs. Of course, agricultural entrepreneurs, those have been in Cuba for a long time already. People who operate in the informal economy. People, the third category, general in the literature, are entrepreneurs that were members of the official status quo of the Communist Party and some of the institutions, and now they turn into entrepreneurs. The fourth category are professionals who find an opportunity to basically sell their services legally in the informal sector. I'm not going to get much into these prospecting and entrepreneurial strategies, but prospecting, you mentioned that by the way implicitly, networking, and number three is one that I haven't seen so much evidence of in Cuba yet, which is new enterprises that basically are disguised as public enterprises, but they're truly private enterprises. I think the closest approximation to that may be the Cooperativa and Agropecuarios, or some of the enterprises that are leasing property from the states, but not so much at this point. Here, of course, we're familiar with what are some of the recent developments in the entrepreneurial sector in Cuba, and so it has grown quite significantly as a share of GDP, as a share of output, as a share of total production. And of course, one of the motivations is that people want to improve their living standards and they see opportunities. It's not just, again, doing this in abstraction, but doing it from a very practical, pragmatic basis. So what some economists have said is that because of that, the quantity of goods and services in Cuba have improved quite dramatically. A business like yours couldn't exist many years back. So now you have new quality of products. You just mentioned that you've got a distribution agreement in Havana, in some of the retail outlets, or one of the retail outlets that I know quite well. And so that's also consistent with what we find in other places. So new opportunities have emerged in Cuba as a consequence of this. Of course, we all know that the tax revenues collected by the government have also increased since the expansion of self-employment and all that. But there's some restrictions. There's still many restrictions. So there are a couple of restrictions here that I think we're very familiar with. The challenge, the first one, I think, and I'm thinking about it from more from an economic point of view, but the challenge of procurement, right? We call it input markets, and the real challenge of procurement and supply chain credit, the lack of supply chain credit. Of course, the monopoly of the government in terms of trade, imports, and some other parts of the economy. Limitations with foreign investors. I know that in the new foreign investment law, it says that foreign investors can do joint ventures with some private enterprises in Cuba, but it's not clearly defined, so that still remains a constraint. Property rights. There is one thing about the culture of entrepreneurship that there seems to be an acceptance, whether reluctant or forced or so on, concerning the concentration of wealth. I've spoken to people that I know that are entrepreneurs that maybe they're engaging in double speak, who knows? But they're saying, well, yes, we have to open up to the non-state sector, but we have to be careful with the equality and concentration of wealth. So that's part of the official discourse, that may be part of the official culture and so on. We talked about the insufficient transportation and logistics system, there was a PowerPoint presentation, and you spoke about it from a very practical perspective. And of course the banking system, the primitive banking system, the difficulties in obtaining credit, but not only credit financing, but also equity financing, right? Almost impossible to obtain equity financing. So when I pieced all this together, I figured, what are some of the things that are relevant for Cuba? When you look at other places, when you look at other experiences, when you look at it from taking into account the uniqueness of the Cuban context. And I agree with many of the works of Cornay, a very well-known expert on this topic, that the state and the market can coexist, specifically during that stage towards reform socialism. But there's a caveat to that statement, and the caveat is that if society, which seems to be the way that Cuban society is pointing to, in one way, if society wants a greater role for the private market, right? So the trade-off for that has to be greater private ownership, not only of the means of production, but also greater private ownership of intermediation methods, or greater private participation, again, not just in terms of production. I think most of us sometimes think about the private sector in that environment, and we tend to think about production. Unemployment and production, and we're done. But distribution is a big part of the equation. So a greater role of the private sector in distribution as well, not just private ownership of the means of production. It's very difficult if the society wants to, which seems to be pointing that way anecdotally, right? At least it's very difficult if the society wants to point towards a system of mixed economy where the market, what we consider to be the market, plays a greater role, to do so without more competition and without greater expansion of private ownership across the board, free entry, free exit, okay? So this whole concept in the literature is denoted as the marketization of the socialist economy. If that's what society wants, then of course the only way to get there, even though the state and the market can coexist, to get there further, it requires really a radical increase in the private sector. And so I end with more questions, no answers, more headaches, and just thinking about what are some of the pending questions when you piece all this together. And after I talked to some of our guests from Cuba, which we're very happy to have you here, by the way, and I'm glad that ASCE has done the effort to invite you and the others here, you know, more questions than answers. So now, for the first question that came to my mind, in reading about the private sector and socialism and all that, I went back to the classics. And I read a lot of the works from Lenin in the 1920s, right? And so he referred to this, what you do, and what other entrepreneurs and micro enterprises do as small-scale commodity production. And the way that it's articulated is that to sustain socialism, it cannot be permitted. It was very clear about it. Because if it is permitted, it's going to lead to capital accumulation and eventually to capitalism. So my question is, does the expansion of small-scale commodity production lead to capitalism? And I think we have to sort of think about that. In essence, that's the whole expansion of the private sector. You know, there are some businesses, and I know, I'm aware, I have met many serial entrepreneurs, or I have one in my family who's a serial entrepreneur, right? In the Puerto City. But does it lead to capitalism? And then, to what extent is the government willing to tolerate that? The current government, right? That's another question. Another question that comes to me as I continue to read and write and publish about this and research, what are the thresholds? Multiple thresholds. What are the thresholds for tolerating the private sector? Is it something such as let's lift the lid completely, or is it let's do it gradually, step by step, and up to what point do we reach? I haven't seen the answer to that anywhere. That's a question that keeps lingering. And then, in the context of Cuba, question number 3. And so in the literature, they refer to that as a third form, right? Which is really a combination of the market and a combination of, for the lack of a better word, I'm going to borrow from the literature and say bureaucratic coordination. And so the question really is, are the Cooperativas, Agropecuarios, even the old Cooperativas, even if they are given some more room to transform, is a third form, a third way viable for Cuba as it continues to lead to that expansion of the private sector, to that expansion of the non-state sector. So I leave with questions, no answers, and more research and more white hair from my head. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next presenter is from the University of Matanzas, an economist, Roberto González-Peralo.
Muy buenas tardes a todos. Quiero agradecer a los organizadores del evento por haberme dado la posibilidad de invitar, participar aquí con ustedes y compartir mis ideas sobre la comercialización de los productos agrícolas y específicamente el funcionamiento del mercado cubano. Se ha hablado mucho de producción, pero se habla muy poco de la comercialización. Y esto es un tema muy importante porque es el que cierra el ciclo. Y, por ejemplo, podemos decir que en Cuba ha habido crisis de superproducción. ¿Por qué? Porque los mercados no han sido capaces de enfocar estas producciones de alimentos. Les pido disculpas, voy a leer la intervención porque aquí carecemos un poco de tiempo y explicar los fenómenos económicos en Cuba es un poco complejo y corre el riesgo de extenderme en que me pasen el papelito ese que le tengo enviando. Okay. Uno de los problemas estratégicos a resolver en la economía cubana lo constituye el autoabastecimiento alimentario. La situación no es nueva. En la década del 20 del siglo pasado, en el Club de Rotarios de La Habana, se planteaban estos mismos problemas. En la presentación que traía, sí, en el artículo que presenté, presentaba 2 tablas de estadísticas de la década del 50 en Cuba, donde los números que reflejaban, por ejemplo, de los precios y las importaciones de Cuba en alimentos en la década del 50, lo único que hacía falta era cambiar la fecha, porque las estadísticas eran muy parecidas. En la actualidad, producto de la ineficiencia en el sector agropecuario, el gobierno ha tenido que cubrir el déficit de alimentos con grandes volúmenes de importación, afectando la balanza comercial. No por gusto el gobierno ha clasificado este asunto como de seguridad nacional. En el contexto de cambio que el gobierno viene adoptando un grupo de acciones, entre estas medidas se encuentran, y ya se han mencionado algunas en las ponencias, la entrega de tierras agrícolas ociosas bajo condiciones de usufructo a personas naturales, incremento de los precios de productos agropecuarios y ganaderos. Se experimentan nuevos mecanismos de comercialización que están en experimento en algunas provincias. También la descentralización de funciones de actividades, de las decisiones que se toman a la hora de producir, ya están un poquito más a pie de surco, y la simplificación en la estructura de las funciones de los ministerios. No obstante, los resultados obtenidos no han proporcionado los efectos esperados. Se aprecia inestabilidad en la producción de los principales alimentos, y en algunos productos que han tenido incrementos productivos no se ha reflejado en la estabilidad de sus precios. Ante la presencia de esta situación, resulta evidente que las fuerzas productivas del sector agropecuario aún se encuentran detenidas. Las ciencias económicas en Cuba tienen un gran reto, y es tratar de evaluar el impacto que ejerce la heterogeneidad de los sujetos económicos, estamos hablando de las diferentes formas de propiedad, en los mercados agropecuarios, a partir de las transformaciones que ha sufrido el modelo económico cubano. En este nuevo contexto, se han agudizado las contradicciones que se generan de la forma particular de la utilización de la ley del valor, las relaciones monetarias mercantiles y la relación del plan y el mercado. Los prejuicios con respecto a la actividad comercial y los mercados no son nuevos, vienen desde los primeros filósofos que trataron de explicarse los fenómenos económicos que los rodeaban. Estamos hablando de Aristóteles, tenía prejuicios cuando los trataba de explicar cómo funcionaban los mercados, no tenía muy un criterio de los comerciantes. Incluso para los defensores del liberalismo, como Adam Smith, el interés del comerciante, permítanme citarlo, es siempre agrandar el mercado y limitar la competencia de los vendedores. Esta es una clase de gente cuyos intereses nunca serán exactamente los mismos que los de la sociedad, que en general tienen intereses de engañar y estafar al público. Porque es el criterio, por favor, Adam Smith. En los primeros intentos de construir el socialismo se generó una intensa discusión sobre el modelo económico a aplicar. La polémica giraba en torno a los problemas de la distribución, el mercado, los precios, la planificación y el papel del Estado que juega en la economía. Lenin, en el marco de la nueva política económica, fue satanizado por muchos supuestos marxistas, porque en el año 1921 puso en práctica en la Rusia soviética la libertad de comercio para satisfacer las necesidades de los pequeños propietarios privados. Decía Lenin, permítanme citarlo, en las condiciones de un país altamente atrasado y subdesarrollado, habría sido un error ir demasiado lejos por el camino de la nacionalización del comercio y de la industria, por el camino de cerrar la circulación local de mercancías. Lo dijo Lenin. Cuba no ha estado exento de estos debates. Hoy resulta necesario profundizar en la complejidad de estos temas, donde la heterogeneidad de la economía y el insuficiente nivel de desarrollo de las fuerzas productivas no permiten garantizar la calidad, la variedad y la calidad de los productos que necesita realmente la población. Con el derrumbe del campo socialista y la profundización del bloqueo económico o embargo, para los que quieran traducirlo en inglés, se llevaron a cabo una serie de transformaciones en el sector agropecuario que provocaron cambios en las relaciones de propiedad, la creación de las unidades básicas de producción agropecuaria, UPC, así como el surgimiento de los mercados agropecuarios de oferta y demanda, y posteriormente los mercados agropecuarios estatales. A partir de estas medidas cobra auge también el mercado informal, conocido mercado negro o subterráneo, que sufre una rápida expansión. Esto es motivado fundamentalmente por la insuficiencia de oferta de productos agrícolas, el exceso de regulaciones que limitan la gestión en los mercados de alimentos, la ineficiencia del sistema monopolizado del comercio mayorista y minorista del Estado, la existencia de un comercio a pie de surco por falta de una cultura comercial por parte de los pequeños agricultores y la falta de regulaciones que legalicen algunas de las figuras económicas que existen en la esfera de la circulación. Con las nuevas aperturas económicas han surgido nuevos agentes intermediarios junto a los ya existentes que pueden adoptar la forma estatal, cooperativa, mixtas y privadas, operando en una diversidad de tipos de mercados que cuentan con sus propias dinámicas. Estamos hablando que a partir de esa heterogeneidad en las relaciones de propiedad también existe diversidad de formas de mercado. Estamos hablando de los mercados agropecuarios estatales, conocidos por los MAE. Están también los mercados de oferta y demanda. Existen también los mercados arrendados. Están los puntos de venta. Están los kioscos de productos agrícolas y para si la lista no era tan extensa, están también los carretilleros o los vendedores de productos agrícolas de forma ambulatoria. Cada uno de estos mercados tiene sus reglas, sus leyes, sus regulaciones y sus formas de trabajar de forma diferenciada. Para todos estos actores involucrados en estas dinámicas económicas, la existencia de un modelo de dirección planificada y a la misma vez un fuerte mercado donde tratan de imponerse las leyes de oferta y demanda, se establecen nuevas reglas de juego. En este escenario, las contradicciones se agudizan, producto que se crean nuevas relaciones sociales de producción, imponiéndose nuevas leyes y las características socioeconómicas también empiezan a agudizarse. Cuando se evalúan las últimas medidas aplicadas por el Estado, se observa que tienen como intenciones ordenar el funcionamiento del mercado agropecuario de oferta y demanda y organizar a los vendedores como trabajadores por cuenta propia. Esta política busca eliminar las condiciones monopólicas en las que se operan actualmente, además de liberar a la base productiva de la comercialización de los productos agrícolas después de cumplir sus compromisos con el Estado, donde las regulaciones de los precios operen a través de la ley de oferta y demanda, con el objetivo de ir disminuyendo el número de intermediarios que participan en la cadena productiva. Se busca vincular directamente a las unidades productoras con el mercado minorista, para que estos se apropien de la mayor parte del precio minorista. Yo percibo que la intención es, al final, que el Estado se libere de todo el proceso de gestión minorista y de algunos productos de la cadena de distribución mayorista. Creo que ese va a ser el final de este proceso. Una de las ideas para ir disminuyendo los gastos de presupuesto del Estado es que sean los mercados mayoristas los encargados de abastecer directamente a los centros de consumo social, estamos hablando de una empresa presupuestada, e incorporar gradualmente a la base productiva. Para esto se realiza un experimento con una cooperativa de trigal encargada de administrar el mercado mayorista de productos agropecuarios en La Habana. La misma tiene como encargo social organizar el suministro a los compradores no estatales. Esto está en experimentación todavía. En estas acciones se ve la intención de ir implementando los lineamientos económicos como el 183, 181, 186, 304 y 308. Los lineamientos están organizados por números, son muchos, controlar mucho las cosas. Referidos a transformar el sistema de acopio y comercialización de la producción agropecuaria, así como elevar la exigencia de los contratos y posibilitar al productor concurrir directo al mercado. También limitar la circulación centralizada para los renglones vinculados con los balances nacionales e ir introduciendo paulatinamente la forma no estatal en el comercio, como ya le he comentado. Pero estas medidas están generando que en el mercado, con sus respectivas leyes, sufran algunas distorsiones, reproduciéndose antiguos problemas y emergiendo algunos nuevos. La no correspondencia entre la planificación, la demanda y la contratación de la producción es uno de los que persiste a mantenerse. Esto afecta directamente a los productores que en picos de cosecha observan atónitos cómo se desperdician cientos de miles de toneladas de alimentos, trayendo consigo afectaciones económicas para ellos. Los mercados, en donde las regulaciones supuestamente a través de la oferta y la demanda, los intermediarios, a pesar de estar constituidos por distintas formas de propiedad y en diferentes tipos de mercados, contradictoriamente operan en condiciones monopólicas, creándose las condiciones idóneas para el proceso especulativo. Aquí comienza a generarse un proceso inflacionario, frenándose el consumo y afectando la producción. Los consumidores con índices de satisfacción muy bajos, y esto es algo que también Cuba carece, calcular el índice de satisfacción del cliente. Observan cómo los comerciantes, contradictoriamente, prefieren que los alimentos se pierdan por su prolongado tiempo de exposición a disminuirle el precio para estimular el consumo. Con esta regla del juego no se permite que funcione espontáneamente la ley del valor, la ley de oferta y demanda, y los productores no reciben los beneficios que proporciona la correcta aplicación de la ley del valor. Conclusión. La solución a estas contradicciones es extremadamente compleja. Algunas apuestan por liberar los mercados y que sean las leyes ciegas las que funcionen como único ente regulador. Otros consideran que la acción del Estado, con su aparato burocrático, son los encargados de resolver el caos. La historia de Cuba ha demostrado que ninguno de los dos modelos económicos por separado, en más de 100 años de ensayo, han sido capaces de resolver esta situación. Desconocer las leyes naturales que rigen el mercado es negar a oídos sordos a todo el aparato conceptual que nos regalan los padres de las ciencias económicas. Apostar por el liberalismo económico y reducir a cero el papel del Estado es someter a toda la sociedad a un gran casino donde solo el 1% de la población se alzará con el billete ganador. El restante 99% estarán sometidos a las leyes darwinianas, donde sobrevivirán solo los más fuertes, los capaces de adaptarse a las leyes del mercado. Es necesario movilizar un conjunto de factores que combinen ambos enfoques. Por un lado, que se respeten las leyes del mercado, y por otro, el Estado, haciendo uso de los marcos legales establecidos, ir corrigiendo cualquiera de las distorsiones y las asimetrías que provoquen las aplicaciones de estas leyes. La solución es construir un traje a la medida para que queden resueltas las limitaciones que tiene atrapado hoy el sistema de producción y comercialización de los productos agrícolas en Cuba. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. We're going to have Christopher Baker discuss the papers.
Thank you very much.
Oh, we're going to start with Christopher first.
Buenas tardes. Para mí es un gusto poder estar con ustedes otra vez para hacer una revisión general de los trabajos que se han presentado. Quiero advertirles que vengo con una subjetividad bastante marcada en el campo del modelo cooperativo, dado el hecho que la mayor parte de mi carrera fue en el desarrollo de cooperativas de crédito o cooperativas financieras. Entonces todos tenemos nuestro blind spot, ese posiblemente es uno de los míos. No voy a tratar de analizar los trabajos porque francamente es extremadamente difícil en un periodo tan breve. Solamente había visto uno de los trabajos que se han presentado antes de comenzar esta sesión. Así que voy a hacer más bien unos comentarios generales, quizás algunas sugerencias y algunas preguntas que pudiesen orientar un poco la discusión. Para mí, voy a empezar con el último trabajo, Peralo. Para mí, más que todo, este trabajo es un llamado a la reflexión sobre uno de los retos principales que encara el gobierno cubano, la sociedad cubana, que es el autoabastecimiento alimentario. Y tal es el problema que el gobierno sí, lo señala él, ha sido clasificado por el gobierno como un asunto de seguridad nacional, el revertir el déficit de alimentos. Y en una forma un poco mesurada, el escritor nos indica que los resultados no han sido los esperados, que no es sorpresa para ninguno de nosotros que ha seguido este tema. Lo que sí está él señalando es que hay diferentes formas, diferentes modelos que se pueden seguir, dejando aparte la teoría económica, la parte filosófica, y viendo el elemento práctico, que es que hay que buscar una nueva mezcla, que no todas las respuestas van a venir de Adam Smith y no todas van a venir por parte de Marx o Hegel, pero que hay que ampliar la visión y quizás empezar a enfocar el aspecto práctico. La mayoría de los alimentos importados en Cuba pueden ser producidos en Cuba. Entonces, ¿cuál es el problema? ¿Cuál es el reto? Y hay que encontrar la forma de identificar esos temas y buscar una visión amplia de cómo es que se puede manejar este tema. Él repasa los estudios que se han hecho sobre actividades en Cuba a través de los tiempos, analiza la situación actual y deja, yo creo en esta forma, esa reflexión de que necesitamos ver en una forma muy detallada, pero integrada, el tema del autoabastecimiento alimentario. Yo voy a añadir un punto que salió hace poco en una pregunta sobre la producción orgánica. Yo creo que muy bien al estudiar el tema de cuáles son los retos de producción que tiene Cuba para el autoabastecimiento, también puede entrar el tema de la exportación de productos, que es algo que no generalmente se discute cuando se ve este tema, sino se ve una cuestión interna solamente que afecta a lo de Cuba. Para mí sería muy interesante el poder tener mayor información sobre, por ejemplo, cómo es que está funcionando el Tigral. Yo todavía no llego a entender cuál es la estructura cooperativa en Cuba. Yo tengo el modelo con el cual yo he trabajado 40 años y no es que sea el único, sino ese lo entiendo, todavía no logro entender todas las fases del modelo cubano. Podría hasta decirse que se puede cuestionar uno de los principios básicos, que es la membresía en la cooperativa, quiénes son los dueños de la cooperativa, como una base, una cuestión muy fundamental para entender en qué tipo de organización estamos trabajando. El Consejo Mundial de Cooperativas y Crédito ha empezado unas discusiones en Cuba recientemente y pareciera que no hay mayor interés por el momento en la idea de poder desarrollar algún tipo de entidad financiera cooperativa. Pero el tiempo dirá. También creo que hay muchos estudios y les recomendaría unas largas discusiones con el compañero Bay que se ha pasado muchos años haciendo unas investigaciones y unos trabajos en Cuba. Conoce muy bien ese aspecto para ampliar los criterios que está explorando por el mundo. Voy a hacer mi transición al inglés porque las presentaciones fueron en inglés. I will only make a few comments about the presentations by Fernández-Aballí and by González-Corzo. Again, in the case of the presentation about the cooperative structure, I would ask that it would be useful to, or suggest that it would be useful to describe the cooperative model that you were using in order to give an understanding of how it's working. I would have the following questions that come out of your presentation to me, and one is, given the fact that there has been a comment here made that there has been a congelamiento del tema cooperativo as of very recently, I would be very interested in knowing whether that has in any way affected the kinds of activities that you and others are trying to carry out. I think that I'm fascinated by the fact that you're dealing with one-year turnarounds on your credits and how you manage that. It must be part of what you were referring to as making friends along the way. There is an arte that obviously you have become quite expert at, but I think how to make what seems to be impossible actually work. And you have, I think, a very interesting perspective for those of us who don't have the ability to be as exposed as you are. And I'd be very interested in having a better explanation of what are the cultural barriers you're talking about. Some of the aspects are obvious, others perhaps not. In the case of the presentation by González-Corzo, it's a very interesting focus that you have. I think it's a contribution that I had not seen previously in terms of this evolution through different stages and comparing and contrasting. I can say something based upon your comment that reflects a recent experience that I've had, and that is that the supply chain credit that you're talking about is extremely difficult to deal with in Cuba because right now there's no evidence that the government or those making financial and economic decisions in Cuba believe that there is a need for that. And this takes me to the comments that have been made by Peralo that there is a need to have greater visibility of things. So right now, I think that when you say that there are more questions than answers, I would like to say that certainly captures most of for our experience at the World Council have been over the years in trying to deal with these evolutionary types of situations. Whether or not cooperatives are a third form that would be viable in Cuba, I would go back to a paper that I presented with Antonio Galloso some years back, where we looked at the question of whether credit unions could become a significant institution that would support cuenta propista types of activities. And there were any number of reasons why we concluded that yes, they could be, but that there had to be a loosening up of the liberty to the marketplace that the government was not ready to offer. And I think it's still hard to know whether or not that door is going to be open.
Thank you very much. At the beginning of this session, Chairman De La Torre assigned me the task, which turned out to be very pleasant, of commenting on the first presentation by Carlos. And I'm going to start with a minor quibble, or aclaración, and then everything I'm going to say is very positive. But the minor quibble, I like charts, and I like your first chart, but it showed Cuba as the only virtuous country in the world, down in the little right-hand corner. Sustainable, low environmental footprint, high human development. I would question that a little bit and say if Cuba is in that category, it's because half the sugar industry is shut down, half of industry is shut down, and you've transferred a lot of the pollution to China. That's exactly what the United States and Canada have done, and many other countries too. I thought you made a fine presentation, and you have a tremendous little cooperative on the making, I hope. I'm worried about your cash shortage. I hope you overcome that quickly. That sounds potentially fatal. But I think you are confirming my idea that entrepreneurship and talented entrepreneurship is an abundant resource in Cuba. I think there are three reasons for this. Is something that we see in Havana and Cuba all over the place. But I think there are three reasons for this. One reason is the special period. People were forced to moonlight out of the state sector, earn their own incomes, make their own business opportunities. And people did that and started little businesses of various sorts. Before that, of course, it existed, and I think it has existed since 1960. It existed before that, of course, but When the rationing system was introduced, 1960-61, what happened, of course, that people didn't want everything that the ration gave them, so they started to trade. So you had everybody, almost everybody, lots of people, trading or buying and selling the commodities they didn't want. And in fact, Fidel Castro himself mentioned this one time, saying that Cubans had become mini capitalists. True. But then you look even at the state sector of management. What do you find? Well, you find that the planning system is supposed to organize everything beautifully, but that never works. So, in fact, with all of the disturbances, perturbations in the system, enterprises were never allocated quite what they needed under changing circumstances. So the state managers then had to become what the Russians call dolkachi, or they had to start buying the inputs they needed illegally, technically illegally, but tolerated and necessary. They had to buy the inputs they needed to keep their enterprises going, to fulfill their quantitative targets. And indeed, their success at buying and selling what they needed determined their success at meeting their planned targets, which then determined their promotion. So for these three reasons, the rationing, the imperfections of state planning, and the special period, I think Cubans have become highly entrepreneurial in comparison with Canadians or even Americans. We go to work, we earn our income, that's it. We do entrepreneurial stuff in our work as doctors perhaps, but we don't have to go out of being a professor to drive a taxi or to do 1,000 other things. In Cuba, people had to do that. Well, this is a great resource for Cuba, as I see it. It could be the foundation for the flowering of small and medium enterprise if it operates in an enabling, supportive environment. It is the only thing, as I see it, that could lead to a diversification of manufacturing activities with ideas bubbling up, as in your cooperative, bubbling up from the ground, new ideas for producing things for the national economy and ultimately for export. So I hope that any future government in Cuba supports the small enterprise sector and permits this resource to fulfill its destiny. Thank you very much.
Now we will have 2 minutes each to respond. Mario, you want to respond to
Thank you very much for your comments. We'll continue.
Yeah, you're right. The chart, definitely there's a lot of that going on, where there's a lot of the environmental costs that are being externalized, both in the export of services, to professional services, and in the manufacturing of goods that we use. So definitely. But what is interesting is the fact that it's not going on in Cuba. So Cuba is not working as like a high-tech maquila that I've heard people refer to a plan for Cuba like that. Yeah, I think this would be a total waste of what we can do over there. That's why I always bring that idea out. Structure of the cooperative. We work. So the cooperative law. When you talk about, okay, so let me say how profit distribution works, and then how the leadership structure of the cooperative works. Okay, so in our cooperative we have a very flat structure because we're only 14. So we actually meet, we have very executive work, and we meet once a month to take decisions as a group. So every 10th day of the month we get together and put forward the economic analysis and whatever we need to discuss about, and we make decisions together, vote. So, and the vote is, each individual has one vote, regardless of the contribution to the cooperative, and then you can contribute either by lending stuff or by yeah, sure. And so very flat structure, we make decisions as a group, as a cooperative. And profits in the law you have to be shared according to the amount of work to the quality of the work and complexity of the work. So that's very difficult to measure, but we try. Anyway, so we try to work as a cooperative. We're not pretending to be a company.
Are any of the producers,
What?
members, or any of the producers, the farmers that you were working with to produce the spices, members of the crop?
No, the reason is that they're a member of other cooperatives. So in a way, it's almost like a second degree cooperative. Okay, and they could be members of our cooperative, but we haven't tried. They're happy with the structure they have. 1 year turnarounds are impossible. We have not managed. We have to renegotiate our credit. So you only get 1 year turnarounds in very speculative.
Okay, we're going to open to questions. Let's start here from here.
He's getting you one.
Question to Carlos. Fascinating presentation, I must say. But I have one question about the future of cooperatives in Cuba right now. I think that in Arts and Pet's book, you are predicting, or maybe you are quoting somebody, but you are predicting the possibility that Cuba could become the most cooperatively driven economy in the world, maybe after Yugoslavia fell apart. And then we see the statements made in the last assembly, right? On the one hand, saying that cooperatives are to be preferred to cooperativistas because it's a more social form of organization. And on the other side, saying now we have to take a pausa. We can't really promote new cooperatives and we get more knowledge about the experience so far. What is the message? I mean, if there is any time where this needs to be really incentivized, it's now. So how do you, as a cooperativist, interpret that double message? That's my question.
Questions? Yeah, right here. Romero?
Thank you. I deal with the area of operations research, and that works with more mundane questions than the economic theory, but things like logistics and business infrastructure. González-Corzo said a little bit about these things, but I would like to hear more about the panels. Things like, for example, where are you going to get? You need wholesalers that sells you the machine tools or the working tools, the spare parts. If you're using a printer, you need a cable, you need ink every 2 weeks and so forth. You need to have a distribution network. You need to have some way of making your product known. You need to have some advertising and then getting things to your customers. You need to have a delivery service. You need to have transportation, a car, a bicycle, a truck. You need to have a collection procedure. People have to pay you. Do they pay you with credit? Do they pay you in cash? What do you do with that money? Do you put it in the bank? You need to have some cash flow to buy all of these things that you need. And you have to have some sort of, if you are in an economy, you need to have some growth paradigm and structure and some capital. You need to get money from somewhere in addition to what your sales provide you. And to address Chris's question, cooperatives can be very informal. We have them here all over the place. Particularly, we do technical workshops, and we are half a dozen professionals, and we deal in trust. And there is a customer that needs a workshop somewhere, and we solve it that way. Maybe these guys can do the same thing. And I would like to see more on those logistic issues.
Okay, I have a question.
I'm going to say part of my question in English and in Spanish, my statement. This is a splendid country. Democracy is good. Es un país espléndido. La democracia es buena. For Mario, I'm sorry, for Carlos Fernández, made your presentation in English. You stated that you got a lot of meetings and made a lot of friends. I imagine living in a dictatorship, you do get a lot of meetings. I mean, this is very, very typical. And what concerns me is precisely the end of your statement that along the way you made friends. Because precisely this type of opening with dictatorships such as that is in place in Cuba, in effect lead entrepreneurs to have to collide with the government, because the regime is the only way, the only access you have to success. You have the Chinese model, you have the Vietnamese model, which in effect permeates the regime, the dictatorship. Roberto, and then I want to ask just a quick question. Roberto González, citas a Lenin, yo también lo cito mucho. La nueva política económica, en efecto, hablaba de instituir un capitalismo de Estado, no mercado libre, una clara distinción. Mario, you mentioned General Pernández. General Pernández also said that socialism is irreformable, as you probably know. Now, my questions, and written in both languages, or in Spanish, because principally they both speak Spanish. Crímenes de lesa humanidad incluyen asesinato, tortura, deportación forzosa, encarcelamiento por razones políticas, ideológicas y otras razones más. ¿Creen ustedes que en Cuba se cometen crímenes de lesa humanidad y están ustedes a favor de que en Cuba existe una democracia donde puedan haber partidos políticos de oposición, que donde se pueda libremente expresar la sociedad? ¿Están a favor ustedes de esos?
Okay. Domingo.
Sí, quería hacerle una pregunta a Carlos relativa a las experiencias o solidaridades futuras de la articulación de las cooperativas con el mercado externo, es decir, con los mecanismos de conexión con el mercado internacional.
Okay, one more question in the back, and then I'll respond.
Sorry, Carlos, not to beat you up, because apparently all the questions are coming to you. But you brought up before the issue, something that's holding up Cuban economic development, and that's the issue of logistics, right? Cuba ranks very low in the logistics index, and according to the World Bank, the logistics index is based upon the ease of doing business, the documentation required to import, documentation required to export. So it really just means that logistics are being held up by the Cuban government, it appears, right? I'm not an expert in the Cuban economy, but it just appears, based upon these indicators, that's what they would just, logically lead to. So how are individuals in the non-state sector, right? And I'm sorry, I won't call it the private sector because it's not the private sector, it's the non-state sector. How are they advocating, or how do they even have the freedom to advocate for those improvements? Thanks.
Okay, we're going to have Mario.
Yo voy a responder en español porque creo que la pregunta fue en español sobre... Es cierto que Cornay escribe muy extensamente sobre el hecho de que el socialismo no es compatible con el crecimiento del sector privado, del sector no estatal, etc. Él acepta que es reformable, pero que esa reforma va a llegar a los resultados deseados por los que iniciaron la reforma. Entonces, es la disyuntiva por la cual yo veo la economía cubana, es decir, donde le trato de tomar el pulso a la economía cubana. El área mía es agricultura y como que es agricultura, pues entonces también tengo que meterme en esto del contrapropismo, ¿no? Y es cierto que el socialismo clásico no era reformable, pero vino el socialismo reformado, llevó a condiciones que no se esperaban, se desmoronó todo. Y entonces la gran interrogante es que el propio Cornell reconoce que era un proceso histórico, lo que él estaba estudiando, y que no había en realidad una receta, él estaba más o menos adivinando. la pregunta sobre las reformas económicas, ¿no? Y la otra pregunta ya tiene más que ver con el entorno político y en realidad es una pregunta con muchas dimensiones, pero cae dentro de la misma temática. Es reformable el sistema político. Una cosa que Cornell establece muy claro es que mientras se mantenga el poder estatal, un monopolio, un partido, no hay reforma política. No hay, eso lo sabemos todos, no hay reforma política, y que parte de los lastros del sistema clásico es eso mismo, que se abre un poco la economía en varias direcciones, pero en el aspecto político se mantiene el monopolio estatal. No sé si respondí más o menos, pero ahí va.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, yo vine a hablar aquí de mercado. Me han lanzado una pregunta, pero bueno, yo creo que sí, que la puedo responder. Yo soy un cubano que lleva 35 años viviendo en Cuba, porque tengo 35 años. Primera vez que salgo de Cuba, y tuve la posibilidad de venir a conocer este gran país. Y mi experiencia muy personal y muy particular es que crímenes de lesa humanidad, no conozco ninguna experiencia vivida personal. Yo soy un cubano de los sencillos, de los que viven con $25 al mes. Y eso, explicarlo aquí a alguien sería muy complejo, ¿no? Eso lleva una conferencia, explicar cómo los cubanos podemos vivir con eso. Yo creo que usted también lo sabe mejor que nosotros, pero no tengo la experiencia de vida de ningún crimen de esa manera. Y llevo 35 años de experiencia. Esa es mi respuesta.
Ok, entonces, bueno, a ver, la más difícil de las preguntas, ¿cuál es y bueno, me pongo un poco a la respuesta de mi compañero. O sea, yo no tengo ninguna experiencia personal tampoco de a lo que usted se refiere. Aquí está María, por ejemplo, que en sus investigaciones señala montones de cosas, la escuchaba yo un poco con asombro. Yo no defiendo a ningún criminal. Esa es mi primera posición. Y mi segunda posición es que yo creo en la democracia. Y cuestiono, incluso para defender la democracia, la institución del partido en sí. O sea, no de un solo partido, de todos los partidos. O sea, existirá alguna otra forma de hacer política que no sea con partidos, que de por sí son estructuras tan poco democráticas, ¿no? Y entonces le respondo con una pregunta. Fuera de eso, vamos al confinamiento. Cuando salió la luz, nosotros nos asustamos. No, sin duda. Pero el resultado fue que el gobierno parece estar tomando una política de prudencia con respecto a cómo estructurar el nuevo paquete de leyes que debe venir ahora hacia el final del año para facilitar que los nuevos proyectos entren al mercado con mejores ventajas y evitar el desánimo. O sea, las cosas que hemos pasado, los proyectos del primer paquete de cooperativas, tratando de romper el hielo, genera desgaste. Y yo pienso que más bien la intención es encontrar la forma de reducir ese nivel de desgaste, no de frenar el proceso. Todo lo contrario. O sea, unido a ese anuncio, también se nos invitó a las cooperativas a este año a participar en la demanda del año que viene, o sea, por lo tanto, a poder acceder a los mercados internacionales, bien, a través, igual que lo hace Bucanero, igual que lo hacen todas las empresas cubanas, ¿no? A través de las importadoras que están en los ministerios en igualdad de condiciones. O sea, Purita pudo hacer su demanda de envases este año, igual que la hizo la empresa mixta Mercado. ¿Ok? Si esa fórmula de vincularse con el extranjero es buena o mala, bueno, sí, mi criterio muy personal es que no es muy efectivo, o sea, es como muy lento. Hay que buscar formas de dinamizar la economía para aumentar el índice de logística, de dinamizar la relación con los extranjeros. Con los extranjeros existimos en una economía insular, un mercado chiquitico, una economía abierta. Si no hay cómo vincularse con el extranjero, si no hay cómo comprar y vender, al extranjero cuesta mucho trabajo hacer un negocio en Cuba. Lo único que sé, ¿no? Y no sé, pues chismes así, o sea, no puedo ni siquiera asegurarlo, es que la política es facilitar que las cooperativas puedan vincularse con el exterior. O sea, es la política y se está creando las condiciones para hacer eso posible. Y se van flexibilizando las cosas en función de eso.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. Tamayo?
For Carlos, can you explain when you said that you managed to get your request for envases in the plan? What does that mean? What did that take? What was the advantage of that for you? I'm not sure I understood that whole thing.
My question for whoever wants to answer is, it seems to me as private sector extends, the government control contracts. So how can the government maintain its control, its authority, its influence in terms of its ideology, its principles over the citizens by still allowing the economy to grow in the private sector?
Okay. No more questions? Okay. Vamos a concluir al panel. Mario, ¿quieres responder? Okay.
So we're going to answer backwards because yours was the last question. The government, the state, what we find in the literature is that there's at this stage of the transition, there's 4 general mechanisms to control the private sector. Contradictorily, at the same time, the government facilitates, in some ways, the expansion of the private sector. And so the 4 mechanisms are the one that we most know that's very complex and we need to learn more, which is the tax system in Cuba. The second one is a restriction on firm size and the number of employees and all that. Implicit in that, in the Cuban case, is the edict regarding the concentration of wealth. This political atmosphere, which is peppered or contaminated, if you will, with always reminding people that, yes, we understand that the non-state sector, the private sector, but the concentration of wealth and growing inequality is a problem. So this is a way to sort of ingrain in the mentality of the people that we are still there's some remnants of an egalitarian society. The third is, and this is really more subjective, the fear, the concern of confiscation, renationalization, or what have you. There are people that are young entrepreneurs and all that, but they know the history. They have a concern about, I'm not saying the revolutionary offensive in 1968, but they have a concern about if I grow too fast. It happened to a friend of mine who's an entrepreneur. Grew too fast, flaunted it, and then suddenly, he ended up in prison for a while. He was a garlic farmer too, by the way, so and I wouldn't want to know. So the other one, I'm sorry, I'm overextending myself. The other mechanism is, I think it was pretty evident in all presentations here, limits on capital, on access to capital. And I think I mentioned not just credit and microcredit and those wonderful things, but also equity, right? So it remains that control. Those are the main mechanisms that you see in Cuba for the control for that. And one more, which is implicit in all this, is bureaucracy, right? How difficult it is to get things done, the paperwork. On that, the IRS, the Cuban version of the IRS, has a backlog of orders that are not processed. People want to pay taxes, right? But they don't have enough capacity in some municipalities to process. So that's another constraint, the lack of automation and those things. Okay.
just on the question of control, what I tell my students sometimes is that Cuba is an organized society with a pinch of salt. Okay? So, and about packaging, right? Packaging is a big challenge in Cuba. It's one of the big limitations in the retail industry, especially the food industry. Okay? So the only way to access to packaging is by importing the resins, because there are no inland supply of resins, or even there's only one manufacturer of films. Okay? Now spices are complicated things to pack because they smell and they become rehydrated. Okay, so you have to leave the water away, you have to leave the oxygen away. Okay, so it was very difficult for us to negotiate our way through the ministry and through all the different spaces to access to an appropriate packaging solution. But this year, okay, we had the possibility with this company called Alfredo Lopez, which is in San Jose, and they laminate different packaging, and they gave us an appropriate. We were able to buy an appropriate packaging solution, and we have a guaranteed supply for 2016. And that changes the game in terms of our little industry.
And how reliable will be that promised supply?
Well, we are small, so I've seen the stock, it's in the warehouse. So is it that reliable?
One final question because the reception after.
Mi pregunta es a Corzo, disculpe joven, no sé su nombre, no lo estaba aprendiendo. ¿Este es Corzo y usted cuál es? Carlos, ustedes dos que están impulsando lo que es la cooperativa de Cuba, me imagino que cooperativas autónomas, por supuesto, ¿no? Privadas, en el sector de la agricultura. ¿No creen ustedes que sería muy bueno para impulsar la cooperativa que ustedes están impulsando en Cuba? Sería bueno que el gobierno cubano cumpliera con la primera ley revolucionaria, que fue la ley de reforma agraria, y quitaron las tierras, pero se los olvidó. Yo sé que están muy ocupados. ¿No creen que ustedes, que sería una buena idea de ustedes impulsar eso dentro de Cuba, de que el gobierno cumpla con esa ley de reforma agraria? ¿No cree usted que eso que impulsaría las cooperativas autónomas? O se están empujando las cooperativas independientes, ¿verdad? En el sector de la agricultura. ¿O no?
Como que yo escribo algunas cositas sobre agricultura, voy a tratar de responder algo. Tal vez me equivoque bastante, pero bueno, te lo perdono. Mira, según lo vemos nosotros, y cuando digo nosotros me refiero a un querido amigo y colega que es economista de Cuba, que se especializa en agricultura, que sabe mucho más que yo, a la quinta potencia sobre ese tema. El problema de las cooperativas, obviamente, la gran variante son las VPC. Eso se sabe, ¿no? Que son irrentables, que la gran mayoría no funcionan, que fue un experimento que surgió durante el periodo especial. Las que han sido un poco más exitosas son las CSS. Entonces, las CSS y los privados producen un poco más, que es lo que le estaba apuntando ahí. Las CPA, las cooperativas de producción agropecuaria, han estado perdiendo personal porque se están muriendo los cooperativistas y no hay relevo. Entonces, el gran problema para impulsar las cooperativas, aparte de la parte económica, es una cuestión demográfica, ¿no? Que no cuentan con los. Entonces, con el decreto ley 300 se permite la asociación de los usufructuarios con las cooperativas de crédito y servicios. Pero hay un pequeño problema grande, que es la declaración de la tierra ociosa. Entonces, hay una voluntad o hay un grupo de la población que irónicamente se quiere sumar a las cooperativas, quiere ser un usufructuario con la esperanza de poderse quedar con el usufructo y que el usufructo sea transferible, que lo es ahora, pero es muy limitado. No es el usufructo de Vietnam ni nada de eso por 100 años. Pero a la misma vez las empresas estatales que tienen tierras ociosas no tienen incentivo o no les conviene declarar tierras ociosas porque les reducen las tierras en su posición. Entonces hay lo que decía Cornell y lo que decía, traté yo de más o menos elucidar de acuerdo con respecto al socialismo reformado, el socialismo de mercado que está lleno, hundido de contradicciones. No, por un lado se impulsan las cooperativas, por otro lado hay 40 trabas. Por una parte existe un problema demográfico muy serio y existe esta idea de que hay que recampesinar el campo cubano, repoblar el campo con campesinos. Es un problema serio por la población. Entonces, lo dejo con más preguntas, más incógnitas, más confundido que al principio. ¿Qué es lo que hago con mis estudiantes? Me dicen.
Bueno, vamos a agradecer al panel y vamos a dar un gran aplauso.